Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry, and you are so lucky because not only can you hear us all across Florida on 80 stations, you can also watch us on Tough TV.
TV 38 in the Orlando area, and we trust you will do that. Guest today, Dominic Calabro, the President and Executive Director of Florida Tax Watch. They've been about 35 years watching what our governors and state legislators do with your hard-earned and their taking tax dollars. Stay put. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. I'd like to welcome you on our stations on the Florida News Network and on Tough TV 38, and sometimes we're on the Tough TV Network nationwide. You can watch us on Tough TV 38 over the air with a HD antenna. You can also receive us in select apartment complexes and mobile home parks in Central Florida. We're also on the Summit Broadband Cable TV System, Channel 69. And if you can't get Tough TV, then you need to call your cable or your DirecTV or your Dish TV operator and say, I want my Tough TV.
Okay, well said, sir. And you know, I think one of the amazing things is that Al and I have been doing this for some months now, and the cameras switch back and forth and whatnot, and you and I haven't broken a camera yet.
No, in fact, I think that the cameras love us right now. I think after one of the shows, the camera turned to us and said, and winked. I thought I saw the little lens
Is that
wink.
right? Okay,
yes.
All right. I like that. Very good.
Let's talk about the political winner of the week in Florida.
Yeah.
Enough of this tomfoolery. Omar Khan. This is reported that Charlie Crist has hired the former USF student body president and Obama campaign staffer as his campaign manager. Of course, a lot of positive response. People saying that they love him. He loves Florida. He's the winner. You know, he's coming to help us put the people back in charge. So Omar Khan sounds like a great pick by Crist. Okay. Loser of the week. Of course, Trey Raydell, the Fort Myers congressman, finally realized that when one is widely dubbed the cocaine congressman, after a coke bust, the only option left is to say bye-bye.
It took him so long. Well, anyways, he's gone. So
thank goodness. Also, here's a story about Charlie Crist. He was on Morning Joe, which is an MSNBC show with a conservative named Joe Scarborough. Used to be a U.S. congressman
from Florida.
Yes.
Yeah.
He plugged his new book, The Party's Over. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're going to, I know all these guys running for office now have to write books. It's just part of it. I'm writing a book. Yeah, I'm important. I think Kennedy started in 1960. But anyway, I don't want to read a book called The Party's Over. I'm a party guy.
Yeah.
I want the party to keep going. Why is the party over? I don't want to read the book. I don't want to know. So right then and there, bad title. Charlie, if you can recall the book and put it out under a new name called Party with Charlie, I think you'll have something.
Yeah. And in other words, we don't need to book him we don't need to have him as a guest with a book review, at least at this point.
But anyway, this is supposed to be an attack book against the GOP, his former bed buddies.
Yeah.
Remember, Charlie was a proud member of the Republican Party for many years.
And then he was an independent.
Yes, and now he's a Democrat.
Yeah.
What is Charlie, really? I'm not saying anything per se. You know, I'm a one-issue pretty much guy this election, and I'll tell you about that sometime.
Okay.
He gave his standard spiel about how the GOP grew more extreme over time and how, culminating with his embrace of President Obama, he eventually became a Democrat. So it was what that has to do with the party being over, I'm not sure. But it basically says that he was explaining why he's now a Democrat. And he asked about positions on immigration and gay marriage, which he's now for gay marriage. And, of course, he filibustered to tell a story how his relatives came to the U.S. from Greece and Lebanon. But that's not really the answer to the question. Basically, he got a nice opportunity to spiel. And he's good looking on TV, you know.
Wouldn't have anything to do with losing the GOP primary to Marco Rubio, would it? Oh, did I say that? Wow. All right, let us take a pause along the network line. We'll remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Regan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
We will be joined by Dominic Calabro, the President and Executive Director of Florida Tax Watch, when the conversation continues. This is the Florida Roundtable, another edition with Regan Smith
and Al Spry.
All right. Thank you so much, Al. As promised, Al, at this point in the program, we are off to Tallahassee, where we are going to be joined by the director of an organization known as Florida Tax Watch. And we welcome to the Florida Roundtable Dominic Calabro. Dominic, it's nice to have you with us today.
Yes, hello. Good day.
As opposed to my sitting here and reading your biography and your credentials and whatnot, before we even get into what Florida Tax Watch is, how about you go ahead and take the first minute here and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your personal background.
Always very dangerous to give someone like myself that kind of forum, but thank you very much.
I think it's going to be fun.
Thank you for the service also to all of your listeners. It's very, very important to have the public square, the public dialogue. Well, Florida Tax Watch is a 35-year-old statewide nonpartisan nonprofit government watchdog and independent think tank and watchdog, bird dog for the Florida taxpayers. I have been the president and CEO for 30 of the last 34 years I've been at Florida Tax Watch. I've watched the state grow. I've seen so many of the recommendations that Florida Tax Watch has made implemented in the Constitution, implemented in state law, implemented in policies and practices, and it's all because of the hard work and dedication of not only its employees and founders of Florida Tax Watch throughout the state, business and civic leaders who care more about the well-being of the future of Florida than just their immediate personal situation and finances. It's also because of the dedication of elected officials and appointed officials from governors, Democrat and Republican alike, cabinet members, again, Republican and Democratic alike, as well as legislative leaders who, when given the information, the powerful information that Florida Tax Watch has suggested or proposed, despite a lot of strong political interests and special interests to the contrary, said, no, we're going to stand for the taxpayers. We're going to look to see what's best to serve the people of Florida better and add more value. So over the last 34 years now, Florida Tax Watch has made billions of dollars of cost-saving recommendations, and very many billions have been implemented. In fact, the last 4 years alone, since 2009, at least conservatively $4.2 billion of Tax Watch's cost-saving recommendations have been implemented. Notably among them are improvements in procurement, the way we serve our prisoners in the correction system, health care, some improvements in our Medicaid system. Some of these Medicaid trial efforts have been promoted and encouraged by Tax Watch, but also pension reform, long, long overdue. And that continues to be a recommendation of Florida Tax Watch. Why, you might say? Because the people of Florida deserve to have a pension system for its employees, for its managers, and for its government workforce that's consistent with how they, the people, the taxpayers, have to live their lives. And also because too many state systems from Illinois and elsewhere have pension systems that are virtually make the state go bust. We have a very good and pretty sound Florida retirement system, but it's very, very generous. And it costs too much money to pay for benefits owed in the past than to make sure we have a workforce ready, competitive, properly compensated today to serve the people of today and tomorrow.
Let me ask you about the pension issue. Since you brought it up, when you say very generous, what are we talking about? I mean, when people normally go into obviously state jobs, they normally make less than in the private sector, and so they use the pension as a kind of a benefit to get people to obviously serve in the public good. What do you consider too generous? Generous usually a pension is supposed to set up someone for retirement. I mean, sure, you're saying people shouldn't retire or they should get less and have to take Social Security like they're doing now more and more in the private sector. If you could explain that a little bit, that would be great.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you very much.
Actually, it's Al.
Florida Tax Watch does believe that we should provide a good pension for people, not only because it sounds like the moral and right thing to do, but also to make sure you have a quality workforce, to make sure that we don't have high turnover. But there's a difference between having a pension system like a 401k or defined contribution plan and the current defined benefit plan that sometimes has to consume as much as 35, in some cases 40% of the annual salary to make up for the deficit and the long-term obligations, because people are living longer, and a lot of the plans were not set up to do two things: to last that kind of longevity, and two, just like we've seen challenges with the Social Security system, that's what's happening to pension systems of defined benefit, contractually obligated defined benefit plans across these United States. Florida's no different, except that Florida has a more little less generous. The pension system in Illinois, for example, was $100 billion. That's with a capital B. $100 billion underwater in the red. That basically put the state of Illinois. It would have been functionally bankrupt, except states cannot file bankruptcy. Counties can, cities can, but the state government cannot. And so what we're looking at in Florida is when you have to pay. It's one thing to pay 5-10% of a person's annual salary towards a retirement each year. That's great. That's fine. That's competitive. That's reasonable. But when they have to pay 35 or 40%, that's excessive, overly generous, and unsustainable. That means we can't provide services to school children today and tomorrow, or we're less prepared to provide the kind of social services to our needy families, developmental services to those children that have severe physical and mental disabilities. It impairs our ability to have a competitive economic development program because you're paying for unfunded or underfunded contractual commitments of the past. And let me remind you, Mark, and your audience, before we spend one dime of the Florida budget or any governmental budget, these pension obligations are contractually obligated, meaning that by the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of the State of Florida, they have to be paid first before we provide one policeman on the street, before we provide one school teacher in the classroom, before we provide one any ounce of prevention, any ounce of public safety, the National Guard. We must provide these contractual obligations unless a court of competent jurisdiction tells us otherwise. So that's why Tax Watch made these recommendations in a nonpartisan, bipartisan fashion, beginning probably around 2000, but in earnest in 2009 and 10, we had a joint task force that involved Democratic candidates for governor, including Alex Sink, the Attorney General, Republican Bill McCollum, and the Republican candidate who later became governor, Rick Scott. After we did the report, even after Governor Scott got elected, we had a press conference including Alex Sink, then CFO of the state of Florida, and Governor Scott's team announced those recommendations, including the pension reform, which is a big marquee portion of this. The 2011 legislature implemented it. It was later challenged by some folks. Tax Watch helped weigh in on the Supreme Court decision and helped win a 4-3 Supreme Court decision saying it's not only constitutional, but it's sound and good public policy.
Well, let me ask you just a quick follow-up, and I understand. So you're saying the main reason to change pension structures state level is because people are living longer and it's more of a drain on the system? Is that is that what I got from that explanation?
Yeah, in simple terms, yes, Mark.
Well, actually, it's wait.
So wonderful, like others.
It's Al. It's Al. I just wanted to correct
you.
Al.
I apologize. Please forgive me.
But here's the thing. I understand that that seems to be a cause célèbre lately. But won't that make us less competitive in attracting? Remember, the private sector always says, especially at the higher levels of in the CEO range and vice president range, we have to be able to offer $1 million salaries in order to attract the brightest talent. Otherwise, we'll have a quote-unquote brain drain, and then the brightest people will leave our company and go to other companies. What is it, if you make these packages so unattractive by cutting, say, pension and so forth, because you're really not going to be able to pay people decent salaries for state jobs, what is it that prevents a brain drain from our state for people leaving to go to other states?
Al, that's a very good question, but let me provide some check here, if you will. Fact check. About 30, 40 years ago, most state government employees were paid less than the private sector. That was a long-standing trend, and they traded off with a little bit more generous health care benefits. Most importantly, they had protection, career service protection in the public sector, okay, and some pensions. But the private sector back 30, 40 years ago also generally had defined benefit programs, not as generous, but they had them. That began to change about 20 years ago, certainly by 15 years ago. Increasingly, this is at the national level and even in state government, there are a lot of positions that pay more at the state and even local government levels throughout Florida than the private sector. Why? Because of wage compression and competition. Now, at the very top, I agree with you, people, men and women that run multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar corporations do make extraordinary amounts of money, particularly as part of profit sharing. And some government employees at the lower levels don't make that much. But what we have here is a system that's been gamed by so many people, particularly the top brass, who are making over $100,000 a year in pension benefits. And so it was never designed for that purpose. And let me remind you, when President Roosevelt established Social Security, it was established at the age of 65 because people were living to be 66 and 67 years old. So within 2 or 3 years after retiring, they passed away, making room for the next generation. These folks are now living into their 80s. And soon, with improvements in nutrition and healthcare, more and more people are going to live into their 90s. So as you can see, we've had to make some changes and still need to make even more changes in our Social Security system. Likewise, the pension systems across the country have been two things. They've been over-generous relative to the private sector. We do not have a problem with recruiting talent that we would otherwise have, and we're not seeing the kind of turnover and that would warrant making benefits so much more generous. Bottom line is, if you're having a problem recruiting people, pay them more money in salary right up front. That will recruit the people, not long-term obligations that you're not even aware of down the road. We have an example in Miami, city of Miami, a 911 operator retired after, I think, either 25 or 30 years, received a salary of $60,000. But because of spiking and grossly manipulating the system, somewhat of a almost violation of good stewardship and fiduciary on the part of the management team, this person was able to collect 90 hours of overtime a week for the last couple of years. Thus, when she retired in 2002 on a $60,000 salary, actually was making over $150,000, nearly 3 times the amount in pension that's going to be obligated for life. Then with a 3% annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA, since 2002 by 2012, that $150,000 salary was $182,000.
Sure. And people are always going to game the system, but that happens in any benefit program. But we need to take a break right now.
Tell you what, Dominic, we got to pause along the network line. Let us remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest today is Dominic Calabro, the President, Executive Director of Florida Tax Watch, coming up on 35 years watching our government here in Florida and where your tax dollars are going. If you'll stay put, our conversation continues following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is Dominic Calabro, the President and Executive Director of Florida Tax Watch, based in Tallahassee for just about 35 years now. They have been watching what our politicians suggest be done and what they're actually doing with your tax dollars that flow into the state treasury there at Tallahassee. And Dominic, of course, one of the principal things that Florida Tax Watch does is to analyze and criticize, make suggestions. Every year, the governor of Florida has to propose a budget that he sends to the state legislature for a spending plan approval. Florida unique in most of the states in that we do have that balanced budget requirement. But Rick Scott recently unveiled his proposal for the coming year, and that's what you guys do. You dissect this stuff almost right down to the penny. So I want to hear about. I don't know if you've had time to get it all in yet, but overall, your reaction and what's up with the new state budget here?
Well, excellent, Al. Yes, very much so. The governor proposes, and ultimately the legislature disposes. But the governor's proposed a $74,200 million budget, which is slightly less. Actually, it's pretty much flat. It's 0.06% less than the current year budget is $74,240 million. The budget recommendations include $27.5 billion in the general revenue spending and $831 million increase, or 3.1% over the current spending level. So that's made a lot of folks a little bit more giddy in Tallahassee than they have been for the last 3 or 4 years. It's not enough in that the demands and claims on that $831 million is about 5 or 6 times that, and that's not unusual. It's normal. That's why we have budgets. The governor's proposal would offer $574 million, over $500 million in recurring state and local tax cuts, resulting in a combined tax savings of $516 million in the next year, with a $25.5 million tax reduction in the first year. There'd be 114,428 state employee positions, a net reduction after retirements and empty positions. About 57 positions of people that are currently employed would no longer be employed. Some of those would be outsourced in maintenance contracts to maintain state facilities and janitorial and things of that nature. We have a whole list. The state would left with general revenue reserves of $1.7 billion plus another $1.1 billion in the constitutionally protected Budget Stabilization Fund, $600 million in the Lawton Childs Endowment Fund, and $1.7 billion in other trust fund reserves. This brings total state reserves to $5.1 billion. Now, just a few years ago, when the previous governor left the state was left with virtually no reserves. I mean, when Governor Bush left office, he left the state flush with tremendous cash reserves of over $7 billion on a much smaller budget, if you will. The new governor came in, and rather than cut spending or control expenses, he just continued spending, but then spent down virtually all the reserves the state had. So we're about to rebuild them almost to where they were. This has improved Florida's credit rating, while the United States, as you know, had a decline in the credit rating. So that means there's more confidence on the part of bondholders and investors that Florida's on the correct path, and putting away reserves is a very, very good thing. Some of here's tax cuts. The governor's looking to roll back the motor vehicle license fee, which was passed in 2009. This will provide an annual savings of $25 for the typical car registered in Florida. He's looking at a sales tax holiday. The governor's recommending a 10-day back-to-school sales tax holiday, which would actually be the longest back-to-school sales tax holiday in Florida's history. There would be no sales tax collected on purchases of school supplies, $15 or less, clothing, $100 or less per item, or computers, $750 or less per item.
Well, let me ask you this as a quick update, like a follow up on it. And I understand. It sounds like you like the governor. You think he's doing a good job?
Well, I don't like or dislike the governor. It's not my job to like him.
Yeah.
It's just to look at what he does.
I mean, as far as tax cuts,
who they are. Yeah. We like these things. I mean, we've been recommending that the state put aside reserves, cut costs where you can, roll back fees and taxes that were raised in more challenging times. We raised fees in 2009 of over close to $2 billion. One was a more than $1 billion cigarette tax increase that hurt Florida's most vulnerable, poor people. And they also raised a lot of these tag fees that hurt Floridians when they could afford it least. So it's nice to give them a little something back.
One of the things that you were about to mention that I think is brand new this year is the hurricane tax sale. Or
yes, it is. A few years ago, after the 2004 multiple hurricanes that hit Florida, TaxWatch had recommended, and the state began to look at providing some kind of appropriate targeted tax relief. Now we're getting to see the governor's recommended. I think the legislature will adopt a 15-day sales tax holiday for hurricane prepared supplies that will prepare one for a hurricane. That's a substantial savings that I think is broad-based. In other words, it just doesn't help the wealthy. It doesn't help just the low income. It helps a broad array of tremendous number of Floridians who they can say, hey, look, now the economy is improving. We'll get back a little bit of the tax increase they stuck us with just a few years ago. But one thing TaxWatch really likes, and we like to see this happen by every governor. Some governors do a better job than others, and that is implement the government efficiency recommendations. TaxWatch issued a report again. We do it year after year now in the last several years of modernizing Florida government and offered ways of over $1 billion of savings. And already the governor's recommendations include contract management savings that we think over the last 3 years has saved $25 million. He's offering some more. Real estate optimization to better utilize existing space in real estate in Florida, reducing some Medicaid fraud, employee state health insurance changes. TaxWatch has long recommended that, the folks at the top, legislators and top agency heads, they haven't been paying anything for their health insurance, while the rank and file have. So this will treat everyone the same, and that alone would save the taxpayers about $26 million.
Let me switch gears here for slightly. Are you for or against a flat tax rate? I'm just curious. What do you think of the flat tax? A flat tax, either nationally and for Florida. What do you think of that type of a thing, flat taxes?
Well, Floridians generally like the nature of a flat tax. They significantly hate, oppose, and find very unfair progressive taxes on their income. So a flat tax that allows for a pretty high level of exemptions for family members, like for family of 4, mom and dad and 2 kids, with a reasonably high deductible level, provides a lot of fairness and equity, and yet encourages people to save as well as invest. And so the most important thing when all government is not the tax rate. The most important thing we have to do in government is to control the insatiable appetite to spend other people's money. And TaxWatch has helped do that at the state level, and increasingly at the local government level, we're helping local communities do likewise. Has
the government ever come after you, like with the IRS? You're hearing about some stuff like that now.
There have been times. I mean, we had the highest levels of government calling me names and so forth, because it was truth to power. We're telling the truth about how some items were inserted in the budget. But right after we came out with it, the governor vetoed 11 out of the legislature's 11 projects that were on our list. So, we just do our job, hunker down, do it well, and we've been here 34 years, over a third of a century, and these folks kind of come and go. But more importantly, we don't focus on who does what. We focus on what do they do. Is it good? Will it help the taxpayers? Is it fair to all? Will it build a better and more prosperous and healthier Florida? And if it does, we stick to it. We don't bend. We don't yield. And that's why TaxWatch is well respected, from Governor Childs and Governor Graham to Governor Bob Martinez to Governor Jeb Bush to Governor Scott and to all those in between.
Let me ask you this now. We've thrown around a lot of numbers and a lot of information. The size of your staff there in Tallahassee and a little bit about their backgrounds.
Oh, excellent. Listen, this is a softball. Thank you, pitch. We have some of the most talented people in the state of Florida. Our staff, we've got a very modest budget, a little less than $2.5 million now. But these folks can be matched up against some of the most knowledgeable folks in Florida government, state and local government. We have people who have their a PhD in economics from Auburn University, a master's in economics from Auburn University, and 2 other masters. That's just one gentleman who runs the Tax Watch Council of Economic Advisors that helps advise the state. This gentleman has helped the state of Florida get tax exemptions and improvements for manufacturing. He also helped the Tax Watch help the state of Florida move towards trying to receive 100 million tourists a year. So that research is empirically sound and based on their credentials, their success, and in making improvement in Florida. We have another gentleman who runs our center, the Tax Watch Center for Smart Justice, who is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, went on to get his law degree from Duke University, then got a master's in law letters at George Washington University, spent 30 years in the United States Navy as a JAG officer, served as a general counsel to the Secretary of the Navy, then later worked as chief assistant state attorney in Jacksonville, spent 4 years with the Wounded Warrior Project, and now runs the Tax Watch Center for Smart Justice. These are very, very talented, brilliant people. Our director for the Tax Watch Center for Health and Aging is an extremely talented and dedicated woman, Tamara Demko. She served in different administrative capacities, has her bachelor's from University of Florida. We're diverse, Seminoles and Gators alike. She has a master's in public health from University of South Florida, a law degree from a little podunk school called Harvard Law School, and is now finishing her PhD or doctorate in public health at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So our chief research officer.
We'll have to cut it right there. We got to take a break.
We do need to take another pause along the network line here, Dominic. So we'll remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is the president of Florida Tax Watch, Dominic Calabro. Our conversation continues following these messages. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is Dominic Calabro, the president of Florida Tax Watch. And Dominic, thank you for spending all this time with us today. We know you're a very busy man.
Well, listen, thank you all very, very much. I was just finishing, you asked about our talented staff. I'm just going to mention one more, and that's our chief research officer and general counsel, Robert Weissert, a graduate of Michigan State University with a degree in economics and public policy analysis, then went on to University of Virginia Law School, distinguished himself there, then served the United States Senate and the Congressional Research Service before coming to Florida and working here at Florida Tax Watch. So we've got a very, very talented group of people, but more than just talented people. These are men and women who bring insight, innovation to public policy. Let me give you a great example. We know how important great teachers are in improving student performance and teaching our kids and helping them compete at very, very high levels. We know that. There's no question about it. In fact, a great teacher contributes at least to 60 to 65% of a student's learning. Okay, the other 35 to 40% is from whom? The principal, directly from the principal. We know that it takes only great principals to get great teachers. Great teachers will not stay at schools where they don't have great principals. So Tax Watch asked about a year ago, the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education was down in Florida, and I said, Secretary Duncan, is there any place that rewards great and wonderful principals? Any state, any community? He said, no. I said, how important would that be if we could do that? He said, incredibly. Almost one of the top things we could do to improve our students' performance and create great schools to compete on international levels. I said, great, we will do that. So this first year, Tax Watch has helped create, in partnership with Florida State University's Learning Systems Institute, elite principals. In fact, 5 of them, actually 2 from elementary school, 2 from middle, and 2 from high school. A good many are from South Florida, Miami-Dade in particular. These are men and women who have been there 3 years or longer, beat all the odds, if you will, in that they got their schools dramatically improved on a sustained basis, where they were facing a majority of students that had English as a second language, or were Title I schools, meaning they had a disproportionate number of free lunches and free meals. So these are men and women who are breaking all the stereotypes, finding a way to improve education in our state. This is going to be a game changer. Where is it brought to you? by Florida Tax Watch.
We got time for one more quick question with a quick answer. What are you most proud of? What's your accomplishment? Would it be the balanced budget amendment? What are you most proud of in the 30 years that you've been doing this?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think it's building a stellar organization that truly has become the unwavering eyes and ears of Florida taxpayers, that it's perpetually there. It will never focus on anything but will add value to the people and taxpayers of Florida, not only those who pay taxes, but the vulnerable citizens who may not have the full voice to see that the fiscal policies of the state serve their best interests, that reduce waste and inefficiency and bring more value to them and to their families.
Not a fair question, but let me ask it anyways. Over the 30 years or so that you've done this, what is there one particular incident that stands out that you remember? You say, "Wow, we beat this one, and it was really stupid," or something like that. You know, a tax turkey over the years that you remember.
Yeah, it may well have to do with the budget turkey stuff. That's something that legislators just seem to really rile under, and I understand their concern. But you know what? I think the citizens of Florida appreciate someone that says we're going to hold these men and women accountable, or at least present them to the governor and present them to their elected representatives back home. It's not an easy job. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be honest, consistent, uniform, and at the end of the day, does it make the state of Florida healthier and better and more competitive and more prosperous? And the answer unequivocally is yes. So that's our job. We love it. We are honored and happy to serve the people of Florida. You know, we're a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit. This is an institution that is of, by, and for the people of Florida. That's what the founders of our nation wanted, and I'm real proud of that. And I think the people of Florida increasingly can take great pride in an organization that did not exist 35 years ago. It does today because of some great wisdom and some great dedication.
A website where they can go to check it out?
www.floridataxwatch, spell out Florida, spell out taxwatch.org.
FloridaTaxWatch.org. Dominic Calabro, the President and Executive Director of Florida Tax Watch, thank you so much for being with us this day. We invite you to come back and do this again. We know that you guys are busy. You're on top of it. You're watching where our tax dollars go. And thank God you're there. We need somebody to do it, that's for sure.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate this
Thanks a lot.
discussion.
This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we'll be back with a closing thought following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV in the Orlando area. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And again, we say thank you to Dominic Calabro for visiting with us this day. I'd talked with Dominic many times, and I figured it was high time we had him as a guest on the show here.
It was. It was a good interview. I'll tell you what, he starts going, and
he knows his stuff.
He is a guy. He is a nuts and bolts, detail-oriented fella.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about same-sex marriage and the changing public opinion briefly. The GOP is reeling. They don't know where to be on this issue. Even Charlie Crist has switched. The public opinion is changing at breathtaking speed. People are saying, all right, you know what? There's more important things than to worry about if people want to be together. Don't worry about it.
And
so, yeah.
You know what has happened here just in the last couple of weeks. In South Florida, a couple of gay couples have filed suit against the Florida statutes that prevent this, just as has happened in other states. And apparently, these are not kids; these are older people who have been together for years, who are serious about it, and they are going to mount a challenge to the Florida statutes. So it'll take time, but we'll see where it goes.
Well, you know, my prediction, I think you share it, is that gay marriage will be legal in all 50 states within the next 5 years, I want to say.
I don't see why, if a couple of ladies or a couple of gals want to be together for 20 or 25 years or 2 years, why they shouldn't be subject to the same miseries as a man and a woman.
I'm going to quote you on that, Reagan Smith. Well, this is the funny thing about this and why we brought it up. The change is very vexing for the GOP. They're used to the issue getting to conservative voters, and it's like it used to be a big wedge issue for them, you know, because people were so against it for so long. And now they're torn between their traditional stance and the political base on one hand and the quickly changing political landscape. So it's going to be interesting to see where the GOP goes on this particular issue.
Yeah.
Well, we saw it 50 years ago with miscegenation laws and equal rights for black people and all. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to have to call a pause along our network line here. Thank you again for being with us today. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
We'll see you again in 1 week with another edition of the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.